Hello everyone, welcome to Group 11 presentation. We are Jennifer, Miguel, Apov, and Choma. Our presentation today is on state-owned enterprises around the world as hybrid organizations. Some facts. SOEs represent about 10% of global GDP, 15% of GDP in the regions like Africa and Asia, 20% of global equity market value. SOEs were 9 of the 15 largest IPOs from 2005 to 2012. State-owned or privately owned firms were seen as totally distinct. The writer seeks to know why SOEs continue to survive and thrive in today's economy. This paper specifically looks at key issues such as leadership and how it may affect the firm's decisions about strategic issues. Focus is on the varied ways in which states intervene in the management and ownership of firms. It identifies a range of stakeholders and the resulting objectives with which SOE management must contend. SOEs today are viewed as hybrid organizations in which the levels of ownership and control by the state varies. Some hybrid SOEs such as Brazil, Petrobras, and Bill experience high levels of government ownership, but are largely independent in their operations. Government ownership of other firms like Energies de Portugal is relatively low, while government control is high. Hence, ownership in this setting does not necessarily equate to control. When managed well, hybrid organizations can gain elements of the different institutions to survive and thrive. Three core managerial theories: transaction cost economics, agency theory, and institutional theory can help us learn about organizations to develop our understanding of hybrid SOEs. The similarities and differences between these SOEs and other organizations. Two basic forms of economic organizations, markets and hierarchies, exists from a transaction cost standpoint. The self-interest actions of individuals and firms focusing on issues such as prices and profits form the basis for the market organizations. Rationale for hierarchical organizations is that the visible hand of management supplants the invisible hand of market in coordinating the supply and demand. Thus, from a transaction cost perspective, hybrids can be viewed as organizations that combine aspects of market transactions and characteristics of hierarchies, hence fall between the two alternatives. Insights on hybrid SOEs can also be drawn from agency theory, as it addresses the conflicting interests between managers and owners on whose behalf they manage organizations. Classical agency theory assumes that both principals and agents are self-interest seeking utility maximizers, with agents being risk averse and principals who could diversify their holdings being risk neutral. However, given the hybrid nature of many SOEs, a multiple agency theory perspective enables us to see the SOEs having potential conflicts of interest among different agency groups. Regardless of whether they are wholly state-owned classical types or hybrid types, SOEs are clearly products of the institutional environment, thus rendering institutional lens as a helpful theoretical tool. Institutional theory shows that the laws, rules, norms, and boundaries in established organizational fields strongly affect the behavior of actors. The goal of the case analysis was to examine SOEs from a diverse set of countries and industries to understand how they operate. SOEs were selected from energy, transport, manufacturing, and finance industries. Ownership and control were examined for the different mixtures. High levels of government ownership as owners greater than 50%, intermediate level as 25% to 50%, and low level as less than 25%. These levels were chosen to ensure a clear representation of ownership. The horizontal axis representing the level of government control is divided into high, middle, and low categories based on case histories of the firm and a judgment by the authors branded in reports of government control. The author focused on cases providing clear and strong examples of the given level of ownership and desired level of control, then eventually came to an agreement on the placement of all cases in the cells. The process developed 36 cases of SOEs that populated the 9 cells.
Today, SOEs are no longer purely government-owned, as more economies are embracing hybrid SOEs. The governance of state-owned enterprises is hybrid in nature as it combines mechanism of public administration, informal political interference, and standard corporate governance. By considering SOE governance as hybrid, we bring attention to the existence of alternative governance mechanism that the state can rely on, such as governance through performance contracts, intermediate ownership structures, and informal influence of politicians. SOE governance reflects the fact that SOEs in some respect operate as state agencies or public organizations and in other respect as business enterprises. SOE governance can be interpreted as combining public governance and private governance mechanism to address complex challenges that cannot be effectively handled by private governance or public governance alone. The SOE usually support national economic and strategic interests, supply specific public goods or services, perform business operations in a natural monopoly situation, create or maintain a state-owned monopoly, where market regulation is deemed infeasible or inefficient. In Canada, for example, the state enterprise ownership ra- rationale can be generally understood by referencing Crown corporations, constituting legislations, articles of incorporations, or letters patent. Here, Air Canada has proved to be a good example of a hybrid organization. Since 1989, Air Canada has been privately owned until March 2021. Facing hard times from the COVID-19 pandemic, the airline agreed with the Canadian government to receive financial assistance in the form of shares. Through the Finance Ministry, the government negotiated a deal which saw it purchase of $21.6 million share of the total company value. In the deal, the government also had an opportunity to buy another 14 million shares. Through the shares, the government acquired 20% voting power in the airline, hence making government one of the key players in the airline. The acquisition of the share value by the Canadian government indicates a common trend where the government wants to have a voice in the key economic sector without being involved in the day-to-day management of the companies. It also shows Canadian government to balance control on critical infrastructure and boost the economy. Governments do not want to be involved in the daily operations of institutions for fear of political backlash in case the business fails. To do so, they own a small percentage which does not allow them to be among the key decision makers.
SOEs as hybrid organizations. Traditionally, state-owned enterprises are known to be fully government-owned and controlled. However, empirical research has found that SOEs are beginning to form into hybrid organizations where ownership and control are mixed between government and private firms to accommodate the rapid economic and institutional change in certain economies. For instance, in some cases where the government may have resources enough resources to fund an enterprise or a project, but may not have the skills to manage the firm effectively. Privatization is one of the ways governments seek to manage these enterprises, which in turn forms into hybrid organizations. Hybrid organization and control. The paper analyzes that state ownership affects firm performance in a negative way compared to private-owned firms. This may be due to soft budget constraints, whereby government continuously provides support to underperforming SOEs whenever they are at the verge of bankruptcy, which in turn results to mismanaging resources or overinvesting without analyzing market conditions, as they believe that they would always have the government's financial support. Micro-institutions, institutional development. The institutional development of a country is critical to the economic success of a country, and in this case, in supporting private businesses in that economy. The paper uses the Index of Economic Freedom to determine the level of development of national institutions that support businesses. It states that a country with low economic freedom may hinder the development of new structures to support private firms, whereas countries with high economic freedom like the USA or Singapore are more likely to provide support for private firms. The Index of Economic Freedom also determines the strength of institutions that support businesses in each country. This is the level of control the government has over the country. The paper states that countries with developed institutions, such as the US, New Zealand, Singapore, have low government control, while countries with limited developed institutions, such as Russia, have high government control. These soft supports given to private firms are only true to firms that have great strategic and economic importance in the country. Table 3 shows the 36 firms the paper had gathered for the research, showing the level of government control and ownership in each firm, while Table 4 shows the CEOs and the types of organization these firms fall into, whether private-owned or government-owned. The table shows that countries with limited developed institutions such as China, India, Russia, as seen in Table 3, have mostly state-owned enterprises, as seen in Table 4, due to high government control and limited support to help private firms. Whereas countries with developed institutions and low government control, such as the US, New Zealand, South Korea, have mostly private firms, has seen on Table 4 due to support for private-owned businesses. Next, the paper analyzes micro-institutions with a focus on CEOs from both private firms and state-owned enterprises. It states that the mindset of CEOs from SOEs are more centered on job creation and stability, and not on firm efficiency and profit maximization, whereas CEOs from private firms are more focused on profit maximization. In a case where a CEO with previous state-owned experience manages a hybrid firm, the objective function may differ, which may negatively affect performance as its objective differs from the traditional bottom line, which is to maximize profit. The paper therefore suggests that CEOs from private firms need to reshape the mindset of SOEs to be more innovative and market-oriented when operating in a private firm setting. In conclusion, today's SOEs are no longer purely government-owned, as more economies are embracing hybrid state-owned enterprises. This could mean that more economies are slowly but surely becoming more institutionally developed, and the need for more research is needed to gain richer insights into these new forms of organization.
Looking at the current situation in Canada, there are 49 federal crown corporations. Those corporations cover the full spectrum, from those being heavily influenced at the macro-institutional level, such as public transportation and national security. These SOEs are created to fulfill some societal service which addresses the normative pillar. To the other end of the spectrum, where those SOEs are heavily influenced at the micro institutional level, where CEOs push heavy influence on profit making, for example in gaming and energy sectors. Some SOEs are wholly owned by the state but operate at arm's length from the government, while some are fully funded by the government and others are profit making corporations. Via Rail Canada is a crown corporation that is mandated to operate intercity passenger rail service in Canada. Born out of the need to connect Canadians, particularly those in remote areas, Via Rail in its initial stage was heavily influenced by the Canadian government, who maintained high levels of ownership and control. However, over the years, government has relinquished control while maintaining 100% ownership. Today, Via Rail is still wholly owned by the Government of Canada, but operates as an aggressive private enterprise. It has a board of directors responsible for overseeing the strategic direction and management of the corporation. It also has a management team that comprises a strong mix and balance of skills, knowledge, and corporate experience. Even with its transition from a traditional SOE to a hybrid SOE, Via Rail has sought to maintain its core function, reaching the milestone of serving over 400 plus communities and employing 3,234 dedicated employees. Today, as a hybrid SOE, Via Rail is much more heavily influenced at the micro-institutional level. Through its CEO, its focus is heavily placed on improving efficiencies, growing its service offerings, and ultimately maximizing profits. Via Rail has successfully rolled out a new fleet of rapid, comfortable, light trains, segmented its services, it has added luxury services. It was the first rail service to connect to the global distribution system used to book airline and now rail services. All these efforts equating to Via Rail improving its revenue growth to 46.7% since 2014. Via Rail may no longer be heavily influenced by government regulations at the macro-institutional level. However, its focus on the environment through its climate change commitment, signing of COP21, focus on ecotourism, integrating a policy on supplier conduct and responsible sourcing, shows it is still being influenced by macro institutions such as societal norms and ethical expectations. One could say Via Rail is today focused on the triple bottom line.